Guess who's back? Back again. Let's close it up. Week 13. The ladies, the gentlemen, the fellas. What's poppin'? How you doing? Here to close up shop. Your DraftKings, your Super Draft, your FanDuel, whatever you want to be playing out there. We're going to be talking about it right now. Daily fantasy sports, breaking it down for Week 13. And what we do here is we go position by position. I got my projections, my rankings, ownership projections, a bunch of stuff. Projections for DraftKings and Super Draft. 20 pages of game-by-game notes. A lot of stuff that I'm coming in equipped with, ready to go to war this week in Week 13 and just continue to smack around the competition out there. And hopefully, if you're a Patreon, you'll be doing the same. Or if you're at least a YouTube subscriber, you'll be having a little bit of that information via this video. If you want to unlock the full, every single thing that you could possibly get, check out Patreon. You can follow along to this video with the projections, the game-by-game notes down below. So we'll be talking about some players at every single position that I like, and we're going to be factoring in every single goddamn motherfucking piece of information that we can to actually beat our competition. Yes, we're trying to turn over every stone to find every single edge in the projections, in the ownership, finding the leverage. That will be the That One Dude video tomorrow, mainly finding leverage at each position, but we'll also talk about it pretty in depth in this one as well. And you're going to see some little cards pop up on the screen throughout. Players' names with information about their matchups, their offensive line advantages if they're a quarterback or a running back, their wide receiver cornerback advantages, which we don't want to overrate, right? We don't want to not play DK Metcalf because he's playing James Bradbury. But we do want to just see how these guys match up, whether it is weight, size, speed, athletic ability against each other. And then that's just going to factor in just the analysis side, and then the projection and all that stuff will factor in the rest. Ownership will also help. So if you want to check all that out, again, link down below on my Patreon. But welcome, ladies, gentlemen, fellas, I'm pumped. It's Week 13. This is a week that in my main league, my main season-long fantasy league, as probably many people can relate, I have to win. I've never missed the playoffs in this. I have to win. Goddamn, Christian McCaffrey has made my season very, very difficult, and he is on bye this week. So we're hoping to get him. We're hoping to get him back. Hopefully all your season-long leagues are going well. Hopefully all of you that got the draft kit are in your best ball championships, are getting there in your season-long playoffs. Hopefully you're all crushing it. I have no doubts that you are. Some of you probably aren't, but what are you going to do? You're coming down to this last week, maybe with a little bit of a sweat in your season-long league. As we get on in this and I schmack you around, give you all the information you need to potentially win and probably win all them dollar-rooskies in these contests this week. If you're playing the right contest, you're playing the Millie Maker and you're just throwing entries in there. If you're doing it for fun, whatever. If you're doing it to try and actually win, you're going to lose all your money, right? If you're just playing the Millie Maker, it's the worst possible contest you can play, but it's probably the reason that you're looking into this video. So love-hate relationship remains on for me in the Millie Maker. Hit that like button, hit the big old subscribe button that pops up. I appreciate that a ton. And I'm going to give a little shout to the podcast. If you want to leave a 5-star rating and review on Stitcher on an Android device or the Apple Podcast app if you're on an Apple device, The Sal Vetri Show. We're getting very close to 600 podcast reviewers, and every single person that leaves a review will be entered into a chance to win a weekly $50 giveaway. Totally free to enter. Just leave a review. Takes about a minute of your time. Now, this video is going to be sponsored by, right before we get into the quarterbacks and discuss what is going to be kind of a wacky, maybe the first time this year, wacky quarterback slate where not a lot of guys grade out that well. You have some elite names on here, whether it's their matchup, whether it's their team totals, whether it's their game totals, their environment, not grading out that well from a projection standpoint as we usually have seen for these similar players. Before we get into all that, Jock Market is the sponsor of this Friday show, as they have been every single Friday this year. And Jock Market, as it rhymes with stock market, is exactly that. It is a stock exchange, a stock market, if you will, for daily fantasy sports. And it is a ton of fun. I was a little bit bummed out where I couldn't play when I was in some other states, but now I'm back in my home state and I can actually play some Jock Market. You can play it for multiple sports. You can play it for the NBA when that returns. We had that for the playoffs Jock Market. You can play for PGA, and yes, the NFL, where their market opens at 8 a.m. on Sunday Eastern time and closes at noon. But that's not the only time you can trade. Those 4 hours is when you're bidding on players. The whole idea here is you bid on a player, like on eBay if you can think about it that way. You get the shares of that player, and if they score a lot of fantasy points or more than the competition and the guys around them, bam, they shoot up the leaderboards, bam, you get some return on investment, some profit for buying shares, buying stock of that player. Even if you miss that 4-hour window, you can still live trade your players. Say that you see that somebody's actually getting a lot of targets, just not converting. Maybe you say, hey, I'll pay a little bit extra for this guy if you want to sell him to me. And the guy's like, all right, if you're going to just buy him for a little bit more, he's not doing anything, sure. And then bam, he hits on one of those deep targets. Or you see your player is not doing too well early on. They're not targeting him, but he's a big name player, Julio Jones. You say, you know what, I'll sell him for a little bit cheaper. I'll take a slight loss because I think he's not going to have a great game. Bam, you just saved a lot more loss on your investment. So either way, you can win there. They have a lot of promotions, and the one promotion that they're going to give you if you tune in through this channel is promo code SAL10, SAL10. You get a free $10 upon depositing. So check all that out. Jock Market, link down below. The proud sponsor sponsor of the Friday show. So let's start this off with the quarterbacks. And like I said, the quarterbacks right now, like I have my projections up on the screen right here on the other screen. And if I factor by value, not a lot of people are popping off. Now, obviously, we have some very good quarterbacks on this slate, but it's looking a little bit dicey. You have the two biggest overall like team totals for some of these quarterbacks up here, the ones that we know a lot, right? The Aaron Rodgers, the Russell Wilsons, they have great team totals, 28.5 basically for both of them, but they're also both huge favorites. Aaron Rodgers, 8.5 point favorite, Russell Wilson, 10 point favorite. Now, more times than not, and historically, we want to look for closer spreads so we can at least, if we're going to game stack and team stack, have a potential shootout. And as you go down, then you see Kyla Murray, who, yes, a very good quarterback, but in a very difficult matchup here, not even 23 implied points. Deshaun Watson just lost Will Fuller, doesn't have his basically 3 of his 4 starting receivers, with Kenny Stills and Randall Cobb also out, only a 23.5 implied total. Justin Herbert against New England, who they're usually very good at shutting down rookie quarterbacks, a 23 team total. So all these spots right now for these quarterbacks, they're not looking all that elite. If I actually factor by value, Mitch Trubisky and Ryan Fitzpatrick, if he even starts, we won't know until Sunday, are my 2 top value quarterbacks for a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on my Patreon projections. I mean, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not playing Mitch Trubisky and Ryan Fitzpatrick as my top 2 owned quarterbacks. It's just not going to happen. I do think Fitzpatrick actually looks pretty decent against Cincinnati this week if he gets a start, but that's a little bit of a foggy information that we do not yet have. But I do think that we're actually going to have an edge to just play these good quarterbacks, like these good quarterbacks that have decent team totals if it's Rodgers or Wilson, or a decent team total, 23.5 as a slight underdog, historically a good spot to play Watson, because most of them are coming in low owned, like Mitch Trubisky, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Derek Carr are picking up ownership right now. Fine, I'll play the low owned Kyler Murray. I'll play the low owned Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, right? I'll play these low owned MVP potential candidates. And we could put up Aaron Rodgers' card on the screen right now. He's going to have a -17 pass blocking advantage this week. He does have the 3rd overall ranked offensive line, so a powerhouse offensive line, just going up against the #1 overall pass rush on defense right now, which is the Philadelphia Eagles, although they rank 25th in coverage. Nobody, and we saw last week, nobody could stop DK Metcalf. He had, I think it was Peter Overs that said 83% of the team's air yards for Seattle against Philadelphia last week in Seattle's victory, but the #1 defensive line pressure at 35% is this Philadelphia Eagles team. Philadelphia also ranks top 10 in limiting the opponent's passing yards per game at just 210.7, which you're getting right now to Rodgers is 34.5 attempts per game. Last game, he only had to throw 29 times. They didn't have to throw all that much, especially in the 4th quarter. So expect on average more pass attempts here as an 8.5 point favorite, closer to 34-35. He's 6th in the NFL with 8.1 yards per attempt at this point, and he has thrown 60 deep attempts this year. That is #2 in the NFL. So a lot of upside in terms of being downfield upside, a lot of upside in terms of his completion percentage. #1 true passer rating at 129.9. #2 in QBR. #8 in play action passing. So he's been very good. Obviously an MVP candidate right up there, probably neck and neck with Mahomes right now, slightly behind. So Rodgers, for me, you get a nice slight discount, right? You get an almost $1,000 discount, or close to $500 to $1,000 off of all these other quarterbacks above him, but you have all the stacking options. It used to be just Devonta Adams. Now it's Adams, Lazard, Tonyan, and MVS in that order, are all in my groups, with pretty decent run back options. Not great, right? Miles Sanders as a run back of Philadelphia as an 8.5 point underdog, who they're seeing more and more. Boston Scott in the passing game. That's not great, right? But you do have Dallas Goddard, if Zach Ertz doesn't go, to be the #1 passing option more than likely. And you can take shots on cheaper options like Jalen Reagor. If you still want to go to Travis Fulgham, you can go there. It would probably be Dallas Goddard as my #1 run back option in this game with a 48 implied team total. That is your main concern. The run backs for this Packers game, they're kind of not condensed in this offense. It has been Dallas Goddard the last 2 to 2.5 weeks. Will that remain if Zach Ertz does return? Big shrug emoji for you there. Let's break down Russell Wilson now, who's going to have a positive 6% pass blocking advantage against the Giants as a $7,700 quarterback. And look, they're 10-point favorites where it looks like Colt McCoy is going to play. This would be the concern for Russell Wilson. Yeah, they might score 35 points, 31 points in this game, but if they're up 17-3 at halftime, do they just take the air out of the ball? And Russell Wilson, very vintage Russell Wilson like he has been the last 2 weeks, only throwing 60 times in the last 2 weeks. That's 30 times per game. If he only throws 28 to 30 times per game, he's going to have to be really efficient to hit you that 30-point overall winning GPP score, 30+. Now, the Giants rank number 22 in overall coverage and 15th in pass rush. Their defensive line, though, their pressure rate is actually 3rd at 33%. So far, Russ this year, 35.7 attempts per game, but like I said, over the last month or so, those attempts per game are actually dropping. He's 6th in the NFL in deep attempts with 49 so far this year, 5th in air yards, so he's chucking it deep a lot. He has 3rd most passing yards at this point. His 8.2 yards per attempt is 5th, and I currently have him projected for 22.8 fantasy points. Russell Wilson is my highest projected quarterback this week, but it's kind of decimal, like compared to 3 or 4 other quarterbacks. They're all within like a half a point, maybe even like 0.1, 0.2 points on my Patreon projections. So it's $7,700. Russell Wilson's in play for me. The issue with Russell Wilson, and I haven't crunched yet, I usually crunch on Sunday mornings, all my 150 lineups, my 20 max, then I start to look at single entry and 3 max. The issue with him is going to be that his wide receivers are expensive. DK is very expensive, right? AK range. And you have a expensive and fairly expensive Tyler Lockett. So to get to those two guys, it's a little bit difficult. And then your run backs yet again, if Colt McCoy starts, who do you feel comfortable with? Evan Ingram has been good, 9+ targets in 4 straight games, so now it's Colt McCoy. It's hard to trust Darius Slayton on the outside. Sterling Shepard, it's hard to trust as a accurate guy who relies on a lot of volume, maybe 7 or 8 receptions to really have a ceiling game with Colt McCoy in. So another situation where the run back is tough, and now in this specific situation for Russell Wilson, this is why he's coming in low owned right now. Russell Wilson is actually going to be coming in below 5% owned, right around 5% owned in a lot of spots as of Friday morning recording, because he's just so expensive to stack up. Next up is Kyla Murray, who does seem like his shoulder injury is bothersome. We're just going to have to track it. He's questionable for week 13. They say he's going to play. Did not look like himself that last time out, but maybe that was just more so the matchup. They're going to have a -21 pass blocking advantage this week. Although they have the 4th ranked overall offensive line, the defensive line of the Rams right now is ranked 8th in pressure rating, 4th overall in their pass rush, and 6th in coverage. So this is just a really tough matchup. Like, you're seeing one of the lower totals, maybe the lowest we've seen all year for this Cardinals team since maybe week 1 at 22.75 against the Rams. That's the concern there. His projection looks pretty similar, around the 22 range, 22.5 to Russell Wilson at this point. And the Rams are also top 3 in limiting the opponent's passing yards to 203.5 per game. I didn't think there was going to be a week where I saw at Friday morning we see projections around 2 or 3% owned Kyla Murray. So he's going to be something that I don't expect to get a lot of. But if I get 8% Kyla Murray stacks with Hopkins, with Andy Isabella, if Fitzgerald was to miss again, doesn't seem like that'll be the case, but we shall see, with Christian Kirk, right? If I get 8%, I'm going to be 2 to 3 times the field on Murray. I'll get there. He's not my favorite option out of the 3 that we talked about. I would right now rank it Rodgers, Wilson, and Murray. I actually went ahead and made Deshaun Watson a yes, even though there's no Will Fuller, which historically we've seen that's not a good thing for Deshaun Watson, but this is just still a fine matchup for him when it comes to fantasy. You know, he still has his legs rushing for 26.6 yards per game, the 4th most on the slate. He has a positive 38% pass blocking advantage, as you can see on the slate, against Indy's just average pass rush, 14th overall. His 33 attempts per game, number 1 in the NFL in efficiency at 8.8 yards per attempt. He still has Brandon Cooks out there. He still has his 2 tight ends in Darren Fells and Atkins that he trusts a lot. Kiki Kute is somebody that for about 3 or 4 years, now about 3 years, I believe, that he's had some success with in the NFL. It comes down to how often and how good they can coach this game. Can Romeo Crennel actually go 2 tight end sets and actually eliminate the amount of Isaiah Coulter they have to throw out there onto the field against probably like Xavier Rhodes? I hope so. But at that price point, it becomes really difficult to trust him. And what would be your main stacks? It would be Deshaun Watson, Brandon Cooks, and probably Jordan Atkins. Running it back on Indy with Michael Pittman makes the most sense for me. He's had 31 fantasy points in back-to-back games. He's number 6 in deep attempt accuracy. Will Fuller's going to hurt that now. Number 7 in air yards, and he has 291 yards per game. Right now, if Watson does come in around 10 to 12 to 15% owned, that's going to be a little bit scary because we do know that Brandon Cooks is going to be very popular. Jordan Atkins is going to be very popular. Running it back with Michael Pittman probably saves you on some of the ownership of that stack, and overall stacking it all up, if you have like a 12% on Deshaun Watson, that specific stack right there, that 4 or 5 man game stack, is going to probably be like 1% owned or less than 1% owned. So that is a way to get away from all the play the chalk of Brandon Cooks, but still be able to get away from it and still have a unique lineup. So Watson is also a yes for me. Now we start to get into some sketchier situations. Like Herbert I had as a yes. I push him down to a maybe because the team total has dropped from him to around 23 and it keeps going down. His yards per game of 301 per game right now is the best on the slate. It's very good to see. And New England is not getting any pressure. 27th overall, just a 26% pass rush or pass rate. I do think that Herbert's going to probably become a yes for me just because he's a tier below in this Rodgers range of the pricing this week. And he has all the upside in the world. He's throwing the most per game on the slate at 40.2. Right ahead of Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz to be number 1 on the slate at this point. You're seeing right now the 7th most attempts in the NFL. And this is with him basically missing an entire game, a game and a half to this point after coming in for Tyrod Taylor to start the season off. You see some upside as well. 3 rushing touchdowns is good to see on the ground. Top 10 in true passer rating on the year. And he has the 5th most fantasy points per game. Some other stats that you can see right here on the screen. Top 8 in deep attempts. So I'm actually going to go ahead and remake Justin Herbert a yes. We changed Herbert from a yes to a maybe just because of the price point here. And you have the clear stacking options. Herbert is probably the only quarterback on the week that I'm okay to stack his running back with because of the correlation that is going to be there. 16 targets last week. But just in general, even if that didn't happen, Austin Eckler usually gets there. Like a McCaffrey, I would be fine stacking with the quarterback. Like an Alvin Kamara when it's Drew Brees and not Taysom Hill, you know, you get the correlation of a lot of passing game usage. Almost half of their fantasy points come in the passing game, which is going to be tied to their quarterback, passing touchdown upside. So Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen. Well, I wouldn't rank Austin Eckler as the first stacking option. I would still be going to Keenan Allen, probably Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, and Austin Eckler, then like a 3A, 3B option. And then some other interesting options here. Mitchell Trubisky. Look, Mitchell Trubisky, he has played this Detroit team before, and every time he plays them, he's had 20 plus fantasy points in his career. He had 24 fantasy points earlier this year, his best performance. I do think that Mitch Trubisky is actually an interesting option. A negative 10% pass blocking advantage. You would stack him up with Allen Robinson and then just pray that Anthony Miller or Darnell Mooney at a very cheap price point, if you wanted to go to full-on game stack, get you there. The run back options are going to be difficult, right? It's out of the concussion code protocol, but not practicing and not feeling himself, he said DeAndre Swift, or Adrian Peterson actually said that about DeAndre Swift. Kenny Galladay still nowhere to be found. If he doesn't practice on Friday, he's likely to be out again. So then it probably comes down to TJ Hawkinson, and those stacks just don't give me the most confidence, right? I would probably single stack Trubisky with Robinson, if anything, run it back with Hawkinson and go from there. He's just a cheap quarterback that, look, if he actually comes in 10% owned, it's going to be a full fade. He would be a nice option if he was 2-3% owned and he got like 5 or 6% of him. But if you actually are going to have to be playing double-digit percentage of Mitchell Trubisky, I do think he has a ceiling in the 30s. I really do. I mean, he was very close to it last game. In really just a quarter, he had 3 touchdowns against the Lions in a fourth quarter comeback. But it's not something I really want to be playing around with all that much. The pressure rate for Detroit has actually been improving, 6th overall in the NFL at 32%. Some other options here. Kirk Cousins, I think, will probably end up being one of the lower owned options. That's a pivot off of his chalky running back in Davin Cook. That does have some upside. We'll see, and it seems like Adam Thielen might return. Justin Jefferson is still out there. A huge pass blocking advantage against Jacksonville, 30%. Jacksonville's pass rush ranks 30th at 27% pressure rate and 29th in coverage. This is a bad team no matter where you're looking, and now you're going to be getting Kirk Cousins coming in here as a huge favorite is the concern, right? So it just screams at Dalvin Cook game. That's why everybody's going to be on him. But if you wanted to see a troll play of the day, I was on the Splash Play podcast yesterday. You can check that out. I can link it down below with Peter Overzet and Chris Spags. This is basically what I said is like a troll play of the day. Everybody's going to want to be playing Dalvin Cook, and then this team goes off for a Kirk Cousins 300-yard, 2 to 3 touchdown game, and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen get there. I don't think that really does happen. I'll probably have sprinkles of it. So yeah, I think my ownership is really going to be balanced out this week. I usually like to get 2 guys. If you listen to my Sunday Closing Thoughts podcast, I usually like to get 2 guys that come in somewhere around like 50%, like they combine for 50% of my ownership, 30% and 20% of a guy, and then we fill out the rest. So I can be really leveraged on 2 spots. I'm not sure if that's going to happen this week. It might honestly be a lot of like 15% owned guys, from Rodgers to Watson to Herbert to Wilson and Murray. A little bit of like these other guys that are maybes like Kirk Cousins, Trubisky, and things like that. It'll be interesting to see. Normally I've been getting a lot of Watson and Herbert and Rodgers. We'll see if that continues this week or if the team totals and just the spreads and overall projections limit that a decent amount. Let's now move over to the running back position. So as we move over to the running back position, it's going to be a week where there's going to be a lot of guys that come in with high ownership this week. And it's potentially a spot to just start to pivot away from some of these guys. So I'll pull up the running back projections on my other screen right here. So we can start off with Davin Cook. So look, Davin Cook's going to be owned. He'll probably be, honestly, maybe not even the highest owned running back. It seems like David Montgomery's picking up a lot of steam early on in the week for a good reason, at least as of his performance last week. But as he gets more ownership, he becomes a worse play. Coming into week 13, he's now banged up with an ankle injury. He's hurt all over the place. They're saying $9,500 price point doesn't change after busting last week. I do prefer Dalvin Cook to Derrick Henry at this point. I do think that they're both going to be picking up ownership around probably 20% by the end of the week. So if they're going to both be picking up ownership, if Cook kind of slides in at 20% owned, if Derrick Henry slides in at 18 or 20%, if they're at similar price points, similar ownership, I'll just take Dalvin Cook at that point, continue to ride the passing game usage. Both these guys usually, especially as a 10.5 point favorite for Cook, 5.5 point favorite for Henry, both of them usually going to be seeing around 25 plus touches. Jacksonville allows the 29th most, so bottom 3 in the NFL, or bottom 4 rushing yards per game. Jacksonville's allowing 136.2 rushing yards per game. That should just scream bells and whistles for Dalvin Cook, full steam ahead more times than not here, and they're ranked 15th in tackling. Now, Dalvin Cook is averaging 5.6 yards per attempt. That's 10th in the NFL. He is 2nd in yards created, I believe, only behind Derrick Henry at 511, and he has 75 evaded tackles, even after having a bye week, which most teams have, except the teams like Carolina playing this week, the Panthers, and then also missing a game and a half of injury. He's still 1st in the NFL in evaded tackles, 2nd in overall yards created. He's done a lot of stuff in the passing game as well, 225 receiving yards and 8.8 yards per reception. So Davin Cook, fantastic, 10.5 point favorite. Everything screams out with the highest total on the slate, 30.75. They'll probably be playing Davin Cook here. I'm not going to run away from his ownership because it's not 35% like it was last week. I think it might not even come in at 25%, maybe right around there this week. That's fine to end up playing. I do think that somebody's ownership that's going to continue to rise as the week goes on is probably going to be Austin Eckler, and it's still not high enough for me. Right now I have it around 20%. That's not high enough. If it hits 30%, I'll start to think about fading it, but I do think I'm going to get a lot of Austin Eckler. Last week at his dirt cheap price point of 6,100, I had 35%, and then after tinkering a little bit right before the game started, I got to 51% Eckler, and that was fine because he went for over 22 fantasy points. He almost had 100 yards receiving. He had 16 targets, and he had 14 carries, so 30 overall opportunities. Now he gets New England, where it's basically a pick 'em, right? Even game, +1 underdogs, whatever it might be. And if we do think that New England maybe takes away, I don't think they're going to take away Austin Eckler. It's much harder to take away a pass-catching running back. You have to really devote a lot to that. Linebackers that are nowhere near as skilled, but it's easier to take away a wide receiver like Keenan Allen, the way that you can scheme some stuff over top, scheme some stuff just in terms of if he's running crossing routes, take that away from him. So if they do take away this Keenan Allen from Herbert, who's been relying on him for like 10 plus targets every single game, except when he got hurt, it might be another Austin Eckler 12 to 14 target game, 15 carry game again on the ground. And let's not be twisted here. 30 opportunities, and he had 5 red zone touches. This man is going to score touchdowns. So I like Austin Eckler a lot. Now it's a negative run blocking advantage, but the run defense right now is not that great. 24th overall for the Patriots. They're just good at tackling, 3rd overall. Patriots allow 123 rushing yards per game. That's bottom 10 in the NFL. The first game back, the exact stats, 14 carries for 44 yards for Eckler, 11 receptions on 16 targets for 85 yards. Again, smaller sample, but an 18% target share is 4th in the NFL amongst all running backs. He's seeing 6.6 targets per game for running backs, which is heavily skewed from his last performance, but that by far leads the slate as well, 5.6 receptions per game, and he's 1.97 yards per route run, is 5th in the NFL. So not only is he actually seeing these targets and receptions, he's been very efficient on his routes run numbers. He's been targeted at a very high clip. 17.2 fantasy points per game is very good to see. Now, if the ownership keeps getting higher, this might be, I could run back my take a little bit, but at 20%, I love it. Austin Eckler might be my favorite play in the slate at the running back position, even factoring in that ownership. As we go down a little bit more now, we're going to have to track Jonathan Taylor, and if he's active this week, Nyheim Hines is currently going to be a yes for me just because he's a cheap option at 5,300. He's a nice pivot, I would say, off of David Montgomery, who I'll kind of bury the lead a little bit. David Montgomery is coming in maybe to be 30% owned this week, maybe to be the highest owned running back. And I get why he had the big performance last week. He had 5 receptions, but a lot of his yardage, yet again, came on a 57-yard run where he couldn't score on and couldn't break away from against a very bad defense. Now he's facing another bad defense in the Detroit Lions that is slowly getting a little bit better, though. They're not as bad as the Packers in terms of run defense on the ground, and David Montgomery's at 5,500, and everybody's jumping on him. Well, if people are going to jump on him at 30% owned and going to leave Nyheim Hines a third of the ownership, I'll go to Nyheim Hines here, especially in a much better matchup against Houston, especially if you're going to see no Jonathan Taylor still. Like Nyheim Hines in that last game saw 20 opportunities. Philip Rivers was definitely easily and willing to check it down to him, and this is a close total game. 27 implied team total, 3.5-point favorites. Right now, Nyheim Hines is top 5 on the slate with 0.905 fantasy points per touch. So Nyheim Hines right now, number 5 in running back targets on the year. He's number 6, right behind Eckler in yards per route run for running backs at 1.89. Expect around 14 plus touches for him if Jonathan Taylor misses. Otherwise, if Jonathan Taylor is out, we're going to walk back this take and expect maybe 8 to 12 touches where Taylor will see a lot of the workload. Jordan Wilkins, who should be healthier from a shoulder injury, should see some more of the workload as well. So Nyheim Hines I'll end up going to, but only if we're going to end up seeing no Jonathan Taylor there, I'll have more interest. Next up is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is going to be a fantastic tournament play this week. Like fantastic with a capital F. Aaron Jones is probably going to come in around 8 to 12% owned. We can just call it 10% owned this week. He's going to have a positive 4 run blocking advantage, although their pass rush is very good. Run defense not that great, 17th overall, and they're only 29th in tackling. They're allowing a bottom 8 yards per game to the opponent's running backs at 128 per game. This is a very good spot and shapes up well for an 8.5-point favorite in Aaron Jones this year, who's averaging 19.4 opportunities per game, who's averaging 5 targets per game. Everybody's going to jump up and down and say, but Sal, both him and Jamal Williams saw 17 targets apiece. It was a 50-50 split last week. People have been saying this for 2 to 3 years now. Jamal Williams is a good running back. If you actually watch the game, Jamal Williams got like 6 carries on the final drive. So it was like a 17 to 11 split, and they said, okay, this game's over. It's garbage time. Jamal Williams just go in, run out the clock, and he ended up getting in the end zone because he was just running out the clock against the Bears defense that wasn't trying because they knew they already lost the game. So I like Jamal Williams. I think he's a good running back, but Aaron Jones is going to be the guy to get 15 plus touches, probably closer to 20 opportunities in this game, including his targets. Aaron Jones is somebody that I like a lot this week and a very good opportunity. He has 8 goal line carries. That's top 8 in the NFL. Right now, he's averaging around 5.5 yards per touch. That's borderline top 10 in the NFL, and he's averaging 18.6 fantasy points per game. That is top 5 in terms of running backs in the NFL. Aaron Jones at lower ownership in this one at a fair price point of $7,200. Like if you wanted to get away from Davin Cook and Derrick Henry, I think playing Austin Eckler and Aaron Jones is a fantastic way to do that in GPPs. We keep going here, and we keep a very close eye on the injury report in this matchup as a 10-point favorite, Chris Carson, who came back and looked good, right? 8 carries, averaged over 5 yards per carry last week, ended up having a touchdown, who looked good. He's questionable for week 13 with a foot. We expect him to play, but Carlos Hyde, his teammate, has not practiced yet. If Carlos Hyde does not play in this game, get some Chris Carson. Now, the Giants' run defense is good, but he's too cheap at 6,300. The offensive line also in the run blocking department for Seattle is also very good as well. It's going to be a positive 20% run blocking advantage with Chris Carson running behind the 6th overall offensive line. Now, if I look at my projections on Patreon, you can check them out down below to follow along. Chris Carson is going to be a C+ in cash and a B- in GPPs. Now, if there's no Carlos Hyde, he probably becomes a B in both or even a B+ in GPPs. I have him for 13.5 fantasy points right now, but it'll be projecting out for closer to 16+ at this cheap price point if Carlos Hyde was to be ruled out. You're getting 4.8 yards per carry right now. That is 7th in the NFL, and his 17 fantasy points per game is 6th in the NFL. He's been very efficient on a fantasy points per touch basis at 0.968. 0.968 is actually going to come in higher on the slate than DeAndre Swift, then Nick Chubb, then Nyheim Hines and Dalvin Cook and Eckler, all these guys. The only guy that's higher right now than Chris Carson on a fantasy points per touch basis, how efficient you are every single time you touch the ball, is actually Alvin Kamara, if that surprises you. So Chris Carson is going to be a full steam ahead yes for me, if indeed there's not going to be Carlos Hyde. So now we get to our final yes, and it will be Josh Jacobs, who is battling an injury, so keep a very close eye on this. There is a chance that he can miss this game. Right after the game, they said that it could potentially, John Gruden said, be concerning. It's a -6 run blocking advantage for Jacobs, who does project out nicely because, look, he's a 10 or an 8.5-point favorite against the Jets in a situation where his team has a 27.5 implied total. He's seeing 19 opportunities per game on the ground rushing. That's number 3 in the NFL. Add in his 3 tackles and his 22 opportunities per game right now is basically top 4 on the slate, up there with Dalvin Cook, up there with James Robinson and Derrick Henry. He's number 3 behind only Henry and Cook in evaded tackles, number 6 in yards created. And here's the big thing. This is why it's brutal for him. He's running behind. Out of all the running backs in the league when they run, he is number 68 in terms of his run blocking efficiency when he is running. There's just no rushing lanes open, but he's getting so much opportunity now against a bad defense where it can actually pay off for him. So Josh Jacobs is going to be a yes if he plays, though. If he doesn't play, yes, we're going to have a lot of interest in a very cheap Devontae Booker this week. Some other maybes for you are going to be James Robinson, who is going to get a lot of volume. But again, James Robinson, we like the volume that he gets, these 25 touches. But if he's going to get 25 touches as a big underdog here, not a lot of them might actually get you to a 100-yard bonus or these red zone goal line touches in a situation like against Minnesota. It is a good matchup for him. If he comes in lower owned, I'll end up getting to James Robinson more. But right now, he's pushing 20% ownership. So as a big underdog, it's an easy pivot away for me. David Montgomery is just an active fade. He's an active fade on my part. Look, his price point's nice at $5,500, but depending on how you build your lineups, you might not need it. If you just avoid Davin Cook and Derrick Henry, you don't need it. If you want to just pivot over to a Nyheim Hines or pivot over to a Wayne Gallman or a Myles Gaskin, if he's indeed healthy, you don't need to play the 30% on David Montgomery when you could play the 12% on Myles Gaskin, the 10% on Nyheim Hines. David Montgomery had one good week last week. Outside of that, none of his other performances win you probably a GPP. So I'll probably just leverage off of the fact that everybody off of one good week is going to jump on David Montgomery because he scored 25 fantasy points, even though every other week he's basically averaging like 12 to 14 fantasy points for you. And I'll say, okay, if he scores 16 this week, it doesn't crush those people that play him, but it doesn't crush me for not playing him. And now I can try and get a guy who's going to score 20 plus and win a GPP. Miles Sanders is not picking up any ownership, so he might become a yes for me or a that one dude this week. Now he's a big underdog. The passing game usage is getting slipped away to Boston Scott, which is a concern. And I'll pull up some of Miles Sanders' card right now, some of the stats. He's projecting out decently, but I probably only want him in run back options. Huge run blocking advantage here, though. Packers ranked 28th in tackling, 12th in run defense. But the situation is just losing for him. Now he has a 75% opportunity share, but that's slowly slipping away. 13.5 attempts per game right now. His 5.7 yards per touch is good to see. So Miles Sanders could be your low-owned upside play. I prefer Aaron Jones this week. Myles Gaskin, if healthy, if he's full steam ahead and a go, if they only have 3 running backs active on Sunday and not 4, he'll move to be a yes for me. Derrick Henry, I prefer Dalvin Cook too. If you want to play Derrick Henry, can't argue with you. 30 implied total is a 5.5 point favorite, and he's leading the slate with opportunities per game and red zone touches at 50. Really can't argue with you. And then Frank Gore, if you really wanted to punt the position, I'm not going to be doing it. But Frank Gore right now is a positive 20% run blocking advantage against the second worst run blocking defense in the league in Vegas. And in his last 2 starts as a starter since the rookie P. Ryan got hurt out of Florida, 38 touches for 157 yards and a touchdown. Not great, but he does have 5 receptions as well during that time. Wild usage for Frank Gore. Like, you might be getting 16 opportunities in this game, 50 overall yards, which is not great, but then is he touchdown upside or not? I'm probably not playing much Frank Gore. Maybe I'll get a couple like 6 to 8%, but that's somebody at a cheap end if you just wanted to punt the position. I think I'd rather punt wide receiver and tight end. We get over to the wide receiver position now, where I see Davante Adams up here, and he's a yes every single week for me, and I do think Davante Adams will be in the Millie Maker winning lineup this week. If you ask me one player who will be in the Millie Maker winning lineup, I would say Davante Adams. Look, it's not even just about what DK Metcalf did to Slate last week, Darius Slay. I don't think Darius Slay is that great in general. Like, he's not a bad cornerback, but he's not an elite cornerback. He's not the name he was 3 years ago. He's on the downturn of his career. That's basically what happens when a cornerback goes to a different team almost every single time, right? Stephon Gilmore and Richard Sherman are like the few exceptions to that rule. Now, Slay, again, not a bad cornerback, but Davante Adams' caliber is up there with DK Metcalf. They're different receivers, of course, more technical for Davante Adams and just an absolute beast downfield and size speed athlete for DK Metcalf. But I like Davante Adams here to be in the Millie Maker winning lineup, which means that I'm going to like Aaron Rodgers because of that if I get a lot of Davante Adams. So Adams at $9,000, definitely in play for me in this situation. And then you get all these guys up top that I don't really have to talk too much about. DK Metcalf, sure, he's expensive against the Giants. James Bradbury, I'm not worried about it all that much either. But now we get to Allen Robinson, who at $6,700 is arguably the best play in the entire slate at wide receiver position when you factor in the ownership, right? So the ownership's probably going to come in at 24%, but it's not going to be as high as Brandon Cook's 30+%. Allen Robinson likely to see Amani in this one. Amani has just been absolutely terrible. It's going to be a positive 10% matchup. Allen Robinson's on the right side of the field 30% of the time, in the slot 30% of the time, 35% of the time on the left side of the field. So he'll never have like a one-on-one specific matchup. He'll see all those cornerbacks like the rookie Okudah on one side of the field. He'll see Justin Coleman in the slot, the Lions slot cornerback. All these guys, not good. Right now, Allen Robinson is number 3 overall in the NFL in routes run. He's number 3 in total targets, and he has a 25% target share, which is good to see. He's top 10 in air yards. Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles are both throwing to this man this year, 16.7 fantasy points per game. I like Allen Robinson a lot. If I was to play cash, which I don't, I'd be trying to get Allen Robinson in there for his fair price point. Now, somebody that nobody just wants to play, somebody that everybody keeps disrespecting to this point, is going to be Julio Jones. We just have to track his status. Right now, I have Julio Jones coming in around 5% owned, and he is arguably going to be our that one dude this week. We'll see as the video comes out on Saturday morning. Also, like and subscribe if you're still watching. I appreciate that. But Julio, he's going to be questionable with this hamstring injury. Keep a close eye on it. He did miss week 12. He'll likely see Patrick Robinson. He's going to have a positive 50% matchup if he actually goes, a 19% target share this year. In his healthy games, his worst performance, when he leaves, starts a game healthy and leaves it, 16.5 fantasy points. So everybody's throwing dirt on this man's name when he's been playing banged up, but the games that he actually plays the entire game, worst performance is 16.5 fantasy points. If you take out all the games where he gets hurt, he's averaging 20 plus fantasy points per game. He's number 3 in yards per target. He's number 3 in yards per route run. These are all efficiency metrics. Julio Jones at 5% ownership. If that's where he comes in and he's definitely healthy, we see him practice or get off the injury report on Friday, he's going to be a full-on yes for me. Kenny Goddard, I have as a yes. I just don't think he's going to play. Continues to miss practice, I believe, with this hip, this groin injury. He has not yet stepped on a practice field in like a month now. Even if he gets a limited one in on Friday, it seems doubtful that he's going to play. If he does somehow play, I like him. He's too cheap, probably by about $500 or $600. Brandon Cooks is going to have a huge matchup advantage. Getting away from Brandon Cooks is very easy because there's so many other wide receiver options, but his price tag, he is my number 1 value receiver on Patreon. I have him projected for 18.5 fantasy points at 5,600. He becomes a B+ in cash, a B+ in GPPs. The ownership is going to be there, so you have to get different elsewhere. I'll probably avoid it in a lot of spots, but I assume at the end of the day, I'm going to get a lot of Brandon Cooks unless I actively get away from it, which probably means I'm going to get a lot of Deshaun Watson because of that. He'll have a positive 44% matchup when he faces Yas Singh, who allows over 2 yards per cover route. He sees a 22% target share this year on 7 per game. In this one, I'm going to project him to see closer to 8 to 9 targets per game because he does run 100% of the routes, and now there's no Will Fuller out there. He plays 27% of his snaps out of the slot, and he has 10 plus fantasy points in every single game since week 3. So the floor is very safe on Brandon Cooks. Now, a lot of people are going to overestimate him, make him the wide receiver 1, make him a 40% target share guy. No, he'll probably see 1 or 2 more targets. The guy who sees the biggest bump is Isaiah Coulter on this team, who's a rookie out of Rhode Island who barely broke 1,000 receiving yards in his final year there, who is not that great, who probably sees Xavier Rhodes in this matchup. So I don't like that a lot. I still prefer Brandon Cooks if choosing a receiver here with upside because he's going to see a lot of usage, 8 to 9 targets probably more times than not on average in this game, but he is going to pick up ownership. The ownership's going to be there. Do what you got to do to get different elsewhere. If you want to play him, it's fine. I don't really have a strong stance on fading or playing Brandon Cooks this week. Allen Lazard, I do have as a yes because I mentioned how much I like Davante Adams. I mentioned that this week I'm probably going to have Aaron Rodgers as like a top 3 owned quarterback, and then if I want to be full on game stacking it, which I like to do, Allen Lazard would slot next into that. Allen Lazard saw a 22% target share last week from Aaron Rodgers. 6 targets, caught a touchdown. He's basically had a good game in every single fully healthy game. His first week back, he had his training wheels on. He was limited. So in the 4 healthy games that he's played this year, he's seen good performances. Now you just need that upside out of him to see these targets. If Rodgers throws a little bit more this week, because he threw 6 times less than he normally does, if you get 35 pass attempts out of Rodgers, you're looking at closer to 7 or 8 targets for Allen Lazard, a man who downfield right now is seeing some upside, 59 yards per game, 1.82 fantasy points per target right now, is 3rd in the NFL. It's pretty much right next to the Adam Thielens, the Justin Jeffersons of the world. That's how efficient he's been on a per target basis. And now we get to every single one of these Jets wide receivers, and you might think I'm trolling you right now as you can look on the screen, because all the Jets wide receivers are going to be yeses for me. All 3 of them, that is. So if we just go to them right now, Crowder is a guy who's been historically good, right? And if not great with Sam Darnold, he's been his guy. Now 1 week returns him. It's Mims and Perriman still seeing the yards, still seeing the usage in a game where they trail by a lot. And Crowder has a bad game in his return with Sam Darnold. But long term, if we're talking about the past 16 games together, it's Crowder who has a ton of upside. It's Crowder who Sam Darnold looks at in times of need, 3rd downs, moving the chains. A 17% matchup advantage against Marcus Joyner, who allows a 71% catch rate this year. Crowder is still seeing 8 targets per game, and he's running 100% of the route participation this year. 5 targets in week 12 when he returned with Sam Darnold. I do like Crowder this week. I do think that Crowder is going to be a sneakier option this week as a lot of people jump on, and rightfully so, the cheap and upside versions of Perriman, the cheap and upside versions of Denzel Mims. Those guys will probably be coming in closer to like 5 to 10%, maybe even pushing 10% like Denzel Mims, where I think Crowder ends up being a little bit lower owned than he should be. Right now I have Crowder coming in lower owned than both of those guys, but I think they're all in play. I think that you probably choose one of them. I'm not stacking up Sam Darnold with a 19 implied total as 8.5 point underdogs, but Crowder seems interesting at 5,100 as a nice leverage play. Mims is still fine. These guys are not chalky. Mims will see a positive 6% matchup, Perriman a positive 8% matchup. 3 straight 100 plus air yard games for both Mims and Perriman. Perriman actually has 3 straight of 110 yards. You can see all these Jets receiver stats on the screen. In his first game with Darnold, Perriman actually went out there and had 4 catches on 8 targets for 79 yards. He has 7 or more targets in 2 of his last 3 games. 1 with Flacco, 2 with Flacco actually, and 1 now with Darnold. And Mims was seeing all this usage with Flacco, back-to-back games of 100 plus air yards and 8 targets. What would be the result with Darnold? The same exact thing. Another game, 3 straight exactly with 8 targets, and another game with 100 plus air yards, catches 4 of 8 targets for 67 yards. If I had to rank it right now, I would probably be going that I want to get to in this order: Crowder, Mims, and Perriman. Now, they're all very close for me. I actually just only want to get to Crowder because the ownership seems to be lower. If you needed to get it based on a value standpoint, well, then I would obviously go Mims, Perriman, and Crowder to save some money. And then my final yes is actually going to be Michael Pittman, who Michael Pittman has been very involved in this offense recently. I mean, you're getting Michael Pittman coming off of a game where he sees 9 targets. The game before that, he has a little bit of a dud, but he ends up finding the end zone after a big first half usage, 3 catches, 60+ yards, and a touchdown against the Packers. Now he'll have 35-pound advantage against Crossan, the quarterback that'll face in this matchup. He's been seeing 5 targets per game, but again, recently a lot more. 36+ routes run in 3 of his last 4 games. Lots of opportunities for him to just get involved if you're running that many routes. And over the last 4 weeks, he has 27 targets, very good to see, in 16 receptions. So give me some Michael Pittman. He's a nice run back if you end up playing a good amount of the Houston stacks. He's a very nice play as well over on SuperDraft, another sponsor that we usually have. If you want to use my name, SAL, SuperDraft will give you a free money bonus up to $1,000 in multiplier format. Pittman looks pretty decent over there as well. And then we have a lot of other players that are going to get into my stacks per usual. If you're somebody who tunes into the show from just stacking, from just cheap options, right? We're going to have Hopkins with our Murray stacks. Devontae Parker, I'm going to make a yes if we get news Saturday morning or Sunday morning. They said they're going to do it with our Ryan Fitzpatrick being the starter there at $6,400. Devontae Parker still remains too cheap. Keenan Allen's going to be in play, and that's mainly Justin Herbert stacks for me. Tyler Lockett in some of these stacks, right? Adam Thielen is a one-off in stacks. I do like Calvin Ridley, but if Julio Jones returns, so if Julio Jones is active, I prefer Julio Jones at the price point to Ridley. If Julio Jones is out, Ridley becomes a yes. It's as simple as that. Justin Jefferson is in here if you want to get any stacks. Jarvis Landry is an interesting option, an interesting person to talk about, because there was a month of bad weather plus a bye week for Cleveland. Then that kind of goes all past, and Jarvis Landry comes out with over 100 yards, a touchdown on 11 targets last week, and basically what was the first real full game with good weather without OBJ. Now he'll have a positive 11% matchup against Desmond King, who's been banged up this year and allows a 71% catch rate. He's seen over 6 targets per game and a 24% target share so far this year. Landry, and again, week 11, had 3 red zone targets, was the wide receiver 3 with 28 fantasy points on a $143 in the yardage department, a touchdown and 8 overall receptions on 11 targets. He was in the 5K range for the past couple of weeks, but now he's 6,200. This is a fair price point at this point for Jarvis Landry. It's not something that I'm jumping up and down for, but I'll also remind you that this is still the wide receiver 1 on this team and a very good matchup against Tennessee's secondary, who's seeing a lot of usage with a team total of 24 as underdog, so you expect more passing yards and passing attempts out of Baker, and he's only coming in at like 3 or 4% home. So Jarvis Landry, again, in play for me and becoming more and more of a priority as the ownership spikes up. Both of the Rams receivers are down here. I don't really prefer one over the other. If you force me to pick one, I would pick Cooper Kupp. I'm not really getting much of that game. It could be a sneaky stack with the Rams. I just don't really see the upside ever with Jared Goff. It seems to be limited these days. MVS is in my stacks just for the Packers. Kiki Kute, I was expecting more people to go to Kiki Kute. It doesn't seem like he's going to be over-owned this week, which is nice to see because I don't think his role changes all that much, right? Especially if they go 2 wide receiver sets, he might actually go on the field less. So Kiki Kute, tread lightly with him. He's probably going to be like 5% owned. I don't have much interest there. Choosing between some of these cheap wide receivers, right? Kute's down here, Darnell Mooney, and also Anthony Miller. If you wanted to stack up the Bears fully, these are 2 interesting options. It's difficult to really like one or the other with Mitch Trubisky throwing the ball. I'd probably prefer Miller there, who has more time with Mitch Trubisky, who's not going to be running as many deep routes, which Trubisky does struggle to connect on. And then that's about it at this position. So let's finish it up now with the tight end position, which is going to be pretty easy to discuss this week. And as we are here now on the tight end screen, please do hit that like and subscribe. I appreciate that a ton. And check out my Patreon. It's linked down below if you want to support me over there. Patreon.com/Sal_Vetri_. A lot of the tools that I use, I actually have up on the screen right now, assisting me for this video. My projections, rankings, ownership, super draft projections, value ratings, my 20 pages of game-by-game notes, ownership projections, a lot of stuff is up on the screen. If you want to get that and even more, a Sunday Closing Thoughts podcast where we give you all the information. If you're watching to this point, you're probably a dedicated DFS person. You're probably dedicated to my brand at least, or maybe you're just finding me. If you're watching to this point, you're going to get a huge leg up on the competition. All those people that exited out of the video already, all those people that will never see the video because they're not savvy enough to find this type of a video or spend the time to do it. You can check it out. Link down below to follow along on Patreon if you want to in the description to get access to all them tools that are going to gear you up going to war, fighting and killing. Well, I guess maybe not killing, but destroying your opponents in the DFS daily fantasy street. So getting into the tight ends now, Darren Waller is just like almost an automatic yes because of his ceiling. Lately he hasn't been good. I'll be honest with you. Lately he hasn't been good. He just caught like all 7 of his targets 2 weeks ago. But other than that, you're like fighting for him to barely get to 3 receptions, right? 27% target share though, and 8.3 targets per game is still number 1 in the NFL. He's number 1 for red zone targets for tight ends in the NFL, number 6 in air yards, and he has 7+ targets in back-to-back games in 3 of his last 4, and he's a number 2 tight end in yards after the catch. It's just hard to ignore the only tight end on the slate that has actually over 7.5 targets per game, and the air yard share that he has at 22.5. Next up is Dallas Goddard, who they're saying that Zach Ertz could return this week. I don't think he's going to be a full go. I don't think that he's been that great anyways, and you're seeing a very nice Dallas Goddard lately. So Ertz is questionable with an ankle. identical. Goddard has seen a 15.5% target share and a 29% red zone target share. That's where all the upside has been coming for Dallas Goddard right now. 6 deep attempts is also nice to see at this point. You're getting 12 fantasy points per game, which is 6th overall in the NFL, and 18 plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks because that red zone target share at the tight end position is actually resulting in touchdowns. Week 12, 7 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown for him. Dallas Goddard remains a yes for me. Now, my final yes is going to be in these Packers stacks. Robert Tonyan, who's been coming on the last couple weeks. It's very nice to see what Mr. Bobby Tonyan can do. So Robert Tonyan right now, he'll have a matchup against Jalen Mills. It's a fine matchup. He's seen a 13% target share this year. He's number 4 overall in tight end deep attempts. He is used downfield quite often, and there's probably been 2 other chances this year where he could have had touchdowns and either got caught or the ball was thrown a little bit behind him and he had to come back to the ball. 7 total touchdowns is second amongst tight ends. You're seeing a lot of good things. In week 12, he has now back-to-back weeks of catching all 5 of his targets, 5 catches, 67 yards, and a touchdown. He's number 1 in fantasy points per target amongst tight ends because of those touchdowns primarily, but 2.97, very efficient. He's number 1 in tight end separation at 2.75 yards of separation per target, depending on the metric that you look at. That's at the point of reception, or 4.5 yards per separation per route run. He's been very good this year, Robert Tonyan, at getting open. Now at 3,700, if you wanted to play the expensive or slightly expensive Rodgers with the expensive Adams, a cheaper way to do that rather than going to Lazard, who's also affordable at $5K, is to go to $3,700 Robert Tonyan. Now, a guy that I like a lot is Jordan Atkins. The concern, though, is that he's going to be one of the highest owned as of right now tight ends. He's very cheap. We expect Jordan Atkins, who had a bad week on Thanksgiving after coming off of a monster week that could have been even bigger if Deshaun Watson did not underthrow him or overthrow him on a route where he tripped. Atkins is looking like he might be getting more action in 2 tight end sets. The concern for me, though, is that the ownership on Atkins might actually mitigate it. Now you're seeing a 12% target share on 3.5 targets per game. He had low and bad usage on Thanksgiving. He saw 2 targets, 1 red zone target, didn't bring in any of them. Should have had the red zone touchdown. I think he actually dropped it or was slightly overthrown as well, but he did run 17 routes, which was good to see. To be 15% owned at this price point is difficult. Now, obviously, he's very cheap. If he has a 4-catch, 60-yard game, that's getting you there at 10 fantasy points at this price point. So I still have interest in him. He's a borderline yes for me. If that ownership stays at 15%, I can go either way on it. It's kind of like a yes or maybe either way. If it goes closer to 20%, I don't want it. If it dips to like 12%, then it's a yes for me because he's cheap enough. Mike Gesicki is picking up ownership. He'll probably become a no for me unless Ryan Fitzpatrick starts here. And then there's just some other guys that are going to factor it out. You're going to get Hunter Henry at lower ownership in your Herbert stacks against the Patriots. I think that's a fine option, especially if they take away Keenan Allen in the middle of the field. Hayden Hurst, who's had a couple of bad weeks, I like to get back to because of that. People might not go to him. Austin Hooper, who relied on a touchdown last week and has not seen all that much volume in the last 2 or 3 games, some of them being bad weather. His ownership is now going to be lower, so I'm okay to get there. But yeah, basically the higher owned guys this week, like the guys that are picking up a lot of ownership, are Atkins, Gesicki. Waller will normally pick that up. So maybe we stay away from Gesicki, especially if there's no Fitzpatrick. We can maybe play Atkins if we really want to punt it, or we can go to his teammate Darren Fells, who sees 2.8 targets per game to Atkins 3.5. Fells, who's just as active in the red zone as well, saw no usage as well in week 13 though, so that's concerning, but neither did Atkins. It was mainly a wide receiver game. He's seen 3 total targets in the last 3 games. That is a concern though, so probably not somewhere that I want to get to, although they will have a positive 33% matchup against Walker, who allows a 78% catch rate. Atkins does look like a good play this week for $200 less. Fells, who's not as much upside, does have a similar floor to Atkins of like 8 to 12 fantasy points. Could be a nice leverage directly off of him. So that's where we're at right now at the week 13 closing show. I'll have a That One Dude video on Saturday, Sunday live stream on YouTube at 10 a.m. East Coast time, and also Sunday morning, normally around 7 or 8 a.m., our Closing Thoughts podcast. Sign up for Patreon down below and support the sponsor of the show, Jock Market. Daily fantasy sports becomes a stock exchange. Using the promo code SAL10, that is SAL10, they will give you free money bonus, $10 once you sign up. So check it out, free money down below. Download the app, Jock Market, Android, and the Apple Store today. Using that promo code gets you the bonus. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you in the next one, which is going to be the Saturday That One Dude video, unless you're watching this on Saturday, Sunday live stream. Peace out, gang, and enjoy the rest of your day and your weekend.